morning, everybody. I'm going to call the Charter Review Commission of the City of Cleveland to order. It is Thursday, May 10th, about 10:05, Mercedes Cotner Committee Room. Notice of this meeting has been publicly posted. It is a public meeting. Channel 20 is airing it also and recording it. Minutes of the previous meeting on April 26th were emailed to all the commission members, and at this time I'd ask if there were any additions or comments on the previous meeting's minutes. Hearing none. We do not have a heavy agenda today, so I'm hoping to be as efficient as possible and appreciating everybody's time and commitment to this. But I did, with some staff, talk about just kind of this first meeting and a jump-off point. And Rick Horvath, who is a member of the Law Department, Chief Corporate Counsel for the City of Cleveland for many years, is retiring at the end of the month after 43 years of service to the great city of Cleveland. And specific to our task here at this table, Rick also was instrumental in staffing, leading the previous two charter review commissions. So he is the charter kind of guy with the Law Department, and he's leaving. So I asked him to come and just kind of introduce himself and tell us any thoughts, words of wisdom, or watch out for these hand grenades would be appreciated. But for Rick's benefit, I guess we'll just run around the table one more time and introduce ourselves to him for his, just so he knows. Go ahead, Tom.
Tom McNair. I am a resident of Ward 4 and the Executive Director of Ohio City Corporate. Jim Vento, resident of Ward 3. Frank Camardo, Ward 3.
Justin Bibb, Ward 3.
Councilwoman Dawn Brady, Ward 11.
Johnny Ham, 2nd District Community Services Unit Lieutenant. I'm a resident of Ward 13.
Marty Kane, Ward 17.
Brian Casey, Ward 16.
Michelle Kenny, Ward 10.
Barbara Langford, I'm the Law Director, resident of
And my appointing authority. To watch what I have to say.
That's right. So, Rick, I will give the table. We talked about it briefly, but I'm kind of just giving you the floor to let us know.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me to speak to everybody today. I don't know what in the way of background information you've already been given, but let me do a real brief history here for everyone's benefit. What you start with the Charter Review Commission is home rule in Ohio. And home rule in Ohio means, for purposes of this body, that we, the citizens of Cleveland, have the ability to create our structure of government. We don't look to the state, the General Assembly, to tell us how we elect our council people, how we elect our mayor, and how we run our government on a daily basis. And that is set forth in our charter, and it acts as our constitution. So I do believe what you're doing now is a very valuable effort to make sure.
Oh, I want you to use the microphone. Yep, if you can get a little closer.
Oh, what you're doing now is a very valuable effort to go through the charter to see and recommend what amendments you think need to be done to the city. But you should always be mindful and keeping in mind that what you're working on is how the city of Cleveland will operate for the benefit of its citizens. And you should never lose that sight of that important task. The charter itself was effective initially on July 1st, 1914. So now we're about 104 years down the road. To my knowledge, there wasn't a concerted effort to review the language in the charter until the 1960s. Prior to that, there were changes along the way. At one time, we changed from a mayoral form of government to a city manager form of government back in the late 20s and early 30s. Then we came back again to mayoral form of government. But overall, I don't believe there was ever a comprehensive review of the charter and its provisions until the mid-60s. And I think there was a whole effort at that point in time. It was citizen-driven primarily initially to update and re-examine the various provisions in the charter. It led to City Council at that time, placing a ballot initiative before the voters of Cleveland. And it said, it's in Charter Section 200-1, that beginning in 1968 and every 20 years thereafter, there will be a formal Charter Review Commission created specifically to look at the provisions in the Charter. The first time that occurred, of course, was in 1968. Council appointed a Charter Commission. I actually have their report and their minutes in my files. They recommended at that time probably about 20 to 25 proposed amendments to the Charter. Then the next time, of course, the Charter Review Commission was to be organized was in 1988, and I was here at that time, though I didn't actually staff the commission. I was just aware of its proceedings because at that time my duties included preparing legislation for City Council, including charter amendments. The commission at that time recommended about 15 proposed amendments to the charter, but the council leadership at the time had very strong opinions on the issues involved and only put a small number of those proposed amendments before the voters, which is something you always need to keep in mind. It is ultimately not you to propose amendments to the charter. You recommend to the council that they put those matters before the voters, which will tie into a point I want to make near the end of my presentation. In any event, in 1988, I personally believe that it was a missed opportunity because there were a lot of changes that I thought we should have made to the charter, just even if nothing else to update it. But because of the political realities at the time, the council leadership didn't want to get into those kind of battles with the voters as to what changes needed to be made to the charter, so very little was done. So you had this period of time from 1968 to 2008, almost 40 years, where very few amendments had been recommended to the charter. I won't say that the charter was never changed. Again, the council can recommend a change to the charter at any time, but there was never an organized review, a real thorough organized review of the charter. And that gets us to 2008. And in 2008, we had more than enough to keep us busy. The way the original charter section read before we amended it after 2008, the Charter Review Commission had to complete its work within 6 months. You now have the benefit of a year to do your work, but back then we had 6 months to do it. And almost from the beginning, we were inundated with proposed changes. The administration had changes, members of council had changes, Board of Elections had changes. I brought a number that the law department had learned about through the years and wanted to change and update. The clerk of council had changes. She wanted to change processes. We had dozens and dozens of amendments proposed and recommended to us in a very short period of time. And you can, of course, see them detailed in the report that we ended up publishing. And that process, I think, makes your job both easier and more difficult. Let me explain why. I think it makes it easier because I don't think you're going to have a long line of people waiting outside your door to come up with proposed amendments to the charter. You'll have some, and some members of the community will probably recommend some things. I understand you're going to have it on the website, which is valuable to have. And individuals will recommend certain changes. But you won't have, I don't think, the dozens of changes that we had to face within a very short period of time and review and decide which had merits. But why that is a little more difficult for you is I think it puts pressure on you to really be able to explain any amendments that you propose. I think it's very important. One of the things where I thought we missed the boat a little bit in 2008, and it was only because of time, we didn't do a very good job of explaining either to the council in our report or to the voters why a particular change was meritorious. We had so many changes that we were recommending, and we had very animated discussions, but we just did not have the time to sit back and say, this change is important because, and we think the council, you should put it on the ballot because, and voters should approve it because. And I think that created some confusion in the voters. When we turned around and put a lot of these amendments on the ballot, there was a fair amount of criticism from the public saying, we don't know what this is going to do. And I think my recommendation to you is that, because I believe you'll probably have a smaller number of amendments to deal with, that you take a little time and amongst yourself come to some agreement as to why a proposed change is advantageous and be able to explain it to the council and the voters. I just think that'll make the process so much better and easier, because people really need that, I think, to understand why a particular change is advantageous. So you'll have fewer amendments, I believe. You know, I could be wrong, but I think you'll have fewer amendments. But you'll need to really come amongst yourself and come to some agreement as to why the changes you are going to recommend are meritorious. I went through the report from 2008, and I actually have a half a dozen that I want to recommend to you to consider. They're all in the report, but I guess you'll see that there isn't much in the report to explain why. So if you'll indulge me, if we could just quickly go through those. And you do all, I believe, have the report. Starting on page 25, recommendations 15 and 16. This is part of the recall process for electors of the city. But the recall process begins when the individuals who want to bring a recall file an affidavit with the clerk. And the way the charter reads today, the clerk shall immediately give the requester the petition papers, and the 30-day time period for getting those signatures begins on the minute that the affidavit is filed with the clerk. Reality of the situation, and your staff will confirm this, the reality of the situation is the clerk's not sitting around with a bunch of petition papers in her hand ready to pass out to people for a recall. So we've kind of had to have this situation where if a person comes in with an affidavit to begin a recall, that we have to kind of give it back to them and say, come back tomorrow, and then we'll have the petition papers ready for you. We recommended at the time that we just recognize first that they have to act by 4 p.m. on in the day, but then we also, what we primarily were recommending was that we had, that the clerk had until 4 p.m. the next day of the filing of the affidavit to come up with the petition papers. So, and the 30-day window started essentially from the next day. And we've, it's combined, it's not recommendation 15 and 16. A small point, but it troubles me just a little bit that we have to create this situation where you come in with an affidavit and we say, well, take it back and come back tomorrow, and then we'll be ready for you. I think it'd just be clearer to basically say the clerk has essentially 24 hours to prepare the petition papers, and the 30-day window starts at that time. One that I think is essential, and frankly I don't know why we have never put it on the ballot, is on page 27. It's recommendation 22 and 23. These deal with recalls of the mayor and members of council. Curiously, in the charter, there is no mechanism for who will serve in the office if the mayor is recalled or a member of council is recalled. If you look, which you don't have in front of you, but you can take my word for it, the charter sections dealing with filling vacancies in the council and the mayor's office, with respect to the council, it's in where is it here? For the council, it's Charter Section 24. And it sets out a process for filling vacancies for the council. But if you look at the language, it says if the office becomes vacant because of non-election, death, resignation, removal of residency, everything except for a vacancy caused by recall, the vacancy is filled by the members of council. That's in Charter Section 24. Charter Section 73 says if the office of mayor becomes vacant because of non-election, death, resignation, removal of office in any way except for recall, it sets forth the process for who would fill the seat if the person is recalled. Technically, under the charter, if a member of council is recalled, there's no mechanism for filling that vacancy except for the council calling an election and having that election occur. I think right now it reads within 120 days. So the seat will stay vacant for that period of time. Now we can argue whether or not it's important to fill a council seat and have the citizens of Cleveland represented in that ward by a councilman during that 120-day period. But what if it's the mayor? What if the mayor is recalled? There's no mechanism for filling that seat between the time that the voters have decided to recall the mayor and another election can be held to essentially elect the new mayor. There has to be a process to fill that seat, and we recommended in charter sections, which are the two, 21 and 22, a process for doing it. Now, I'm not recommending you follow our process, but I think it's a gap in the charter that really needs to be filled. Fortunately, we've never had to face the situation, but if some of you may recall, and I'm in here long enough, Mayor Kucinich was almost recalled in the late 70s, and it came within only a few votes of him being recalled. And if he'd been recalled, there would have been no mechanism to appoint a mayor or have somebody perform those duties until the voters decided who was going to hold that office. And I think it's a gap that really should be filled.
Can I
You
ask
had
a
a question?
here?
Sure.
For the recall, why is there a reason why recall was separated out of that for that process?
I think all I can assume is back with the originators of the charter that they somehow thought that if a person's recalled, the voters should decide who's going to perform those duties. Maybe back in the early 1900s, a gap of 3, 4, 5 months in the mayor's office wouldn't be a big deal. In today's world, I just can't imagine having a gap in a mayoral position for 3, 4, or 5 months. I don't know how you could, how the city could continue to operate. You still have to have someone who's a decision maker in that position. Again, I think it would be a little easier for council, but that's easier said than done. I mean, the citizens of that ward will want to call someone with their complaints, you know, who should fill it or how that position should be filled, I leave it up to you. But we,
Not only that,
in
but
2008, we came up with a recommended approach to take to fill that gap between the voters recalling the official and electing someone new to the office. But you can come up with something different. But I think there should be something that fills
Not
that
only
gap.
that, but the Voters' Rights Act. So if you live in a ward where a council member was recalled, then do you have an equal voice? So now federal law has changed so much that those individual members of that ward, should you just say, oh, Ward 13 is filling in for the lady in 12 that was recalled, well, is that adequate representation in the eyes of federal law, right? We would say no, because I have no one there representing me to vote on these ordinances. So that's probably a piece of the puzzle too, is that it's changed. The Federal Voting Rights Act has changed the powers of the voter to such a degree that that discussion has changed also. But maybe back then, 120 days of no councilman was
A good thing.
yeah. Plus, there was probably like 300 council members back then.
And I don't think it's ever, to my knowledge, I suppose somewhere along the line, some official's been recalled, but no one's been recalled in the time, actually been, the vote has recalled in the full time, the 43 years that I've been here. Though I say it was close with Kucinich. And so hopefully it would never come up, and it's not like this is a burning issue to take care of tomorrow. But I do think that for good government purposes, the charter should be clear as to who at least performs the duties of mayor or a member of council from the moment that the person had to resign because of recall until the voters get to fill that vacancy.
Rick, sorry.
Yeah, no, go
I
ahead.
just had a question about your comments about 1988 and how you felt like it was a missed opportunity. Do you feel like there's an opportunity inside the charter to better balance out the political realities versus kind of what's needed for the effective operation of city government based on what the charter calls for in terms of what amendments we should be recommending for the residents?
Well, that's an interesting question. I know, I guess I'd have to kick it back to you. I think that's, one of the reasons why I think it's important to have citizens on the Charter Review Commission is because you have the ability to kind of think outside the box a little easier. One of the points I was going to make near the end was don't necessarily believe that the city officials who are on the commission have all the answers, because they have somewhat the prejudice of having been in the bureaucracy and run the city a particular way. Those of you who are new to this, I want to empower you to come forward with your own thoughts and don't be hesitant because you think, well, that may be a stupid idea. Well, if something convinces you that maybe there's another way of handling things, propose it and we'll argue about it a little bit and possibly recommend it. So, the only thing I caution you on something, you can't do a wholesale change. You can't do anything that's too major. For better or for worse, I think the city runs fairly well, and I think you can tweak the process, but there isn't some top-to-bottom change that you can bring into the charter, really. And I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but I think if you've got the idea of some better way to do it, let's propose it and talk about it and within the commission itself.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, to the chief, and this is specific to your point on the vacancy of the mayor. For example, it says that in the period of time between the vacancy and the election, it's the law director that takes over.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, so are you advocating that a recall should be added to this list of reasons of, so for example, it says that successors elected.
Yeah, but it starts up here with if the office is vacant
Right,
for any reason except for recall.
So are you advocating that recall should just be included in this?
That is an alternative way of doing it. It
Okay.
could be by amending both the Charter Section 73 and I think it's, what is the other one, 21, or no, not 21, for the council members, it's 24, to acknowledge that recall is a reason to follow the
This
process
protocol.
that's in those two sections for filling the vacancy. That is an alternative way of doing it, though I think in those cases you'd have to, because there is a specific election process for recall and a specific timeline for when there has to be an election to fill the spot, which is different for when someone resigns or is out of the office ill, you'd have to at least recognize in those sections that the recall election process that's in the recall provisions still needs to be followed. So I hope I'm explaining myself clearly, because under recall there's the council has to call an election within a very specific period of time for recall once the vacancy occurs. So if you just amend the other two sections, you have to recognize that to fill the vacancy, you have to still follow the election that's in the recall provisions. I think for that reason, we explained it all within the recall provisions itself when we did the charter review in 2008. But either way, it would work.
Makes sense. And then Chief, just to Justin's, Mr. Bibbs, excuse me, question, are you saying when it comes to, and I don't have the specific issue in mind, but a major change, are you saying you wouldn't advise that, or legally that authority would fall under council, not this commission?
I guess the point I was trying to make is you don't really need to reinvent the wheel to how the city operates. I think the process is there for a reason and works fairly well. I think it needs to be tweaked. I don't think it needs to have a major change. Now, you know, I mean, back in the 30s, they decided to go with the city manager form of government. It turned out to be a disaster, I think, and they went back to mayoral form of government within a few years. So I guess what I'm advocating is let's not completely change our form of government, just find ways to be more efficient, to operate quicker. I know last time we were really focused in on making sure that things could be done electronically, because now we have social media. You can communicate so much easier to the public through the use of the internet. And the charter may need to be tweaked to recognize that the process can work so much faster today. And maybe you can move government to move faster because you don't have to have as much time to accomplish certain things. But I would not be an advocate for wholesale redoing how the structure of government is structured within the city of Cleveland. Sure.
But I was concerned about charter review aspects of the recall. And I was surprised to find out, Councilman Brady, that in the city of Cleveland, when the mayor is vacant, that the law director becomes the mayor. That was very shocking to me because most of our other surrounding sister cities, the council president becomes the mayor. And I always wondered why that is, and if that's something that we would tackle. I think that if the mayor is, for whatever reason, is going to be out of office, and another elected official, not an appointed official by the mayor, should become that person, and why wouldn't that be the council president? And I always thought that was the case because of the operation. Let me be clear, crystal clear. I love the operation of the city of Cleveland. I love our mayor. I love our council people are here. I'm here in support of what we do. And I always thought that was the reason why the council president was so important. And I remember in the community, people, you know, making sure if there's one particular person from one community who's the mayor, someone else from the council is the council president. So I understood that, and I thought that was a great system. So I was surprised. And I just heard this a couple of months ago, that the law director, and I said, why is that? But I found when I asked my mentor, Reverend Cadmus, that, he said, oh yeah, we knew that with Carl Stokes. And so that's why they knew that, that's why it's important to know your history. They told me that's why it was so important who they appointed for the law director, not who was the council president.
True. Well, I can certainly speak to that issue because I've given little seminars on this very topic. A lot of it is the philosophy of how you want your government created. Cleveland is known as a strong mayoral form of government. It's well recognized for that. Why is that? It's because the mayor appoints his cabinet without consent of the council. So the mayor has the ability to, and is the appointing authority for all of the directors of the city departments. It gives him considerable power that way. And the point that you're taking, that if the mayor leaves office for any reason, except for recall,
I would include a recall in this.
Yeah, well, there is no process for recall, but that's the point I wanted to make. But today, if he would resign, the law director would become mayor. That is, again, a mark of having a strong mayoral form of government. It's possible after the reaction to the city manager back in the 1930s movement to go back to a mayoral form of government felt that it was very important for the city to have a strong mayoral form of government. But Cleveland has had a strong mayoral form of government for all the years that I've been here, and it seems to work. What you find often in suburban communities is you find that the mayor sits at the table with the legislators. If you go to a lot of the suburban council meetings, you'll find that the mayor has a seat right there, and there's kind of a blending between the executive and the legislative functions. That allows the legislators to kind of have a role and have a stronger role in how the day-to-day operations of the city operates, and conversely gives the mayor an ability to influence the legislators. But because of that washing of powers, it's generally recognized as a weaker form of government. Cleveland has a strong executive to run the city on a day-to-day basis, and it has strong legislative body, but their role is to be legislators and to set the policy frameworks for the executive. But then when it comes to implementing those powers, it's left to the mayor to do it. It's worked well for the city. I recommend to you whether or not you want to recommend a change in that. But historically, Cleveland has always had a strong mayoral form of government.
Well,
And allowing the council president to have more influence over the executive potentially, or have a role in that, is generally viewed as a weakening of the power of the executive.
I think that's the point there. I would have a strong disagreement with you. I don't think that weakens the mayor. I think that empowers the mayor. I would love to see our council people more empowered. That empowers the mayor even more. And so it makes sure that they have a better relationship with the council persons and the mayor. That actually demands and dictates that. That makes them stronger in my mind. And I'd love to see whenever there's a coalition and unity, even whether it's forced or whether it's volunteered, that helps our community. That makes us stronger, not weaker. So I would just take issue on that issue. That doesn't make it, I know you may be using the terms differently, but I'm from the community. So when we hear that, we don't hear it inside of the bubble of the city hall. We hear it as, no, that doesn't make him weaker, that makes him stronger. And maybe I want my councilwoman to be strong. And I want her to be able to stand up in the mayor's face and say, no, we must work together, you just can't. I want that. That's true democracy at work, not the crazy stuff that's happening in D.C. right now. So I think that makes us stronger. So I would take issue with that, but I understand. And my proposal, not just to change the recall, but I would say let's change that whole, setup. I know maybe I won't be invited to the next meeting, but I apologize.
Yeah, Director.
Mr. Chairman.
No, I was going to say, I think it's important to point out, though, in the order of succession, that that person temporarily fills the office, that if it is prior to halfway through the term, the law director, or in the order of succession, the director of finance, temporarily fills the office until there's an election. So it's not a permanent appointment. There is another election if it's less than halfway through the term. If it's more than halfway through the term, then that person remains in the office.
Oh, I understand that, and I say that temporary person should be an elected official.
Okay.
I'm clear on that.
Right, and I hope there was no, a strong mayor form of government, but also a strong legislative body, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't work independently of each other.
Absolutely.
We have to work together.
Right.
Council gives the authority for the administration to operate, and that's where our strength comes in if we have, so it's, history dictates what it's called, a strong mayoral form of government, but in application, we know that the individual branches are both equal and strong, and I hope it wasn't taken the wrong way. I know Councilman Casey had a question, and then Councilwoman Brady. All right, Councilman Casey.
I just want to, either to the chairman or the commissioner or the director, so what's the process, right? So a proposal is come up with at the table, there's a vote taken here at the table. Where does it go then? We'll say it passes the table.
Well,
Yeah,
there's no law about this. You set your own rules, because the charter is pretty clear that you set your own procedures. What we did in 2008 is the one I can speak to best. Any proposal that was made, even if it seemed like many members of the commission thought that it was a kind of a crazy idea, we preserved it. And we tried to come up with language for it, and we brought it back to the commission for a vote. So so you know, that's why you have your staff here, and anybody who has my recommendation would be anybody who makes a proposal for a change, that you give it serious consideration. With the help of the staff, they can come up with some proposed language for you to consider, and that you actually take a vote and keep a record of it, and you'll end up with, I mean, you'll ultimately decide this by majority vote, and so anything that you recommend as a majority, by a majority vote, you send to the council, and if it's not rejected, you tell the council that you've considered it. They shouldn't be rejected, they should be preserved, because it's part of the history of the work of this body. But I think any a proposal that's made, you should come out with and come up with language and vote yes or no on it, and recommend it to the council by a majority vote.
So it comes out of this commission to the council. Does it have to go to the administration at all?
No.
Okay, so it comes out of this commission, goes to council, council votes on whether to send it to the Board of Elections or to put it on the ballot?
You send it to, the commission does a report for the council. The council decides which, if any, of the proposed amendments it will put on the ballot. There's no, you know, you could recommend a number of, it's like what happened in 1988. The commission recommended a number of changes, but the council leadership wasn't going to make a number of those changes. They only actually placed on the ballot the ones that they felt they were comfortable with, and they weren't going to put before the voters a number of those changes. In 2008, we gave the council a lot of changes, and the council did a pretty fair job of putting many of them on the ballot. And same here, but ultimately it's up to a majority of vote of the council whether or not they're actually going to be placed on the ballot or not. If a majority of the council does not agree with your proposed amendment, it never will go before the voters.
Okay.
In what election cycle?
Whenever they choose to do it. There's no deadline for them to do it. They could, technically today, the council could recommend a change that we recommended back in 2008, but we never did, if they want to.
Or 88, or 68.
And frankly, the council doesn't need to rely on you. If tomorrow someone in the council felt strongly that the charter needed to be changed in a particular way, they could recommend it tomorrow, and the council could put it on the ballot in November. But what your job is to do a thorough analysis of the charter and recommend what you think are those changes.
Councilwoman Brady.
Thank you. I would just like to respond to Reverend Phillips for one moment, because what you were suggesting about the council president being the acting mayor, if the mayor should leave, sets off a chain reaction. Because what happens is, if the council president leaves, A, we have a vacancy in that ward, B, we have a vacancy for council president, while there's a and then there has to be a special election in that ward, depending on when it is. If it were to occur, there might be a special election in that ward, and then there's going to be an election for council president, and it sets off a whole chain of events. So the way that, I don't disagree with the way that it's set up right now in terms of the law director assuming the position as the first person. It used to be, before we had the residency requirement eliminated, it used to be that it would go to the law director if they lived in the city of Cleveland.
Well, it still is.
It still is. Okay, so the law director, oh, that's right, you do. You have to, right, exactly. Okay, so it's still that way. If the law director does not live in the city of Cleveland, then it goes to the utility director.
Well, finance.
Or finance, then utilities, then port control.
Yes.
So, but what it does is it sets off this big chain of events that you haven't considered. And I just wanted to bring that point up, that,
Well, I just say
Sure.
I'm thrilled to have seen this discussion, because this is what I was recommending you do. You come up with your ideas. You test those ideas. Maybe you've been persuaded to change it somewhat or modify it, or maybe you still feel passionately about it. And if you feel passionately about recommending the change, recommend the change. And amongst your colleagues, debate it, get the pros and cons, and then ultimately take a vote. And that's what this process should be. So I encourage you to continue to think outside the box and to make recommendations, but listen to your colleagues and others as to, because some of these things can be complex, and as the councilwoman points out, you change one thing and it can affect something else. So initially it might seem obvious, but once you start digging behind it, you realize there are consequences for making a particular change. But that's what this process should be all about, and you finally get to a point where you take a vote.
Great.
Next change that I would recommend is a recommendation 43. It deals with Charter Section 39, and it deals with the passage of the Appropriation Measure. The Appropriation Measure is the city budget. It occurs in the budget hearings usually occur in February of each year. State law requires that the budget must be in place by April 1st. The way this is driven, it basically says when the council has given the budget a second reading, they have to hold it over for 15 days until they can give it final vote and passage. They have to do that. That can be difficult sometimes. 15 days is essentially almost 3 council meetings, because council meetings every week on Monday. And you have an April 1st deadline. They have budget hearings at the end of February. If there's need for further deliberations amongst the council before they bring the vote out for second reading, they could get to the point where that 15-day requirement means that they can't pass the budget in a final vote by April 1st. If that happens, the city has no money until the council passes the budget. I think the reason for the 15 days is really an outgrowth of the old days where it was harder to communicate to the public. People would have to see it in the city record. There'd have to be some generation of thought within the community to make sure that the budget was complete and accurate. Now, of course, the budget hearings are televised. Everybody has access to the information and access to the budget details online. To have to wait 15 days to hold this over before there's a final vote, I think is no longer necessary. In 2008, we recommended we reduce that to 7 days. You may want to pick a different time period, but I recommend that you kind of look at that. It's a process that I think is kind of antiquated. On all my time here, there's never been a citizen effort to challenge the budget after the council brought it up for a second vote, and just to arbitrarily have to wait 15 days before they can take that final vote gets you very close to running up to the April 1st deadline, and I'd recommend that you change that.
And it can't be changed for those 15 days.
Right, yes, that's
So
right.
after second reading it, you can't amend or.
Yeah, because then you have to go back to second reading.
Then you have to go back to second reading.
It's a process that just doesn't really work.
Right.
And I've never felt that it worked in all the time that I've been here. The next one I think is kind of important for efficiency purposes. It's the mandatory referral provision in Charter Section 76-3. It's recommendation 56. The council is required to refer a piece of legislation to the City Planning Commission for review and a decision as to whether or not they approve or disapprove the proposed change on a series of ordinances that are defined in 76-3. And this language is very broad. It says that any ordinance that affects the city plan or concern the plan, design, character, extent, location, or use of any public improvement or public property or change thereof. And that has caused the clerk at times to send a whole myriad of ordinances to city planning for review. Take, for example, because I've always thought this in my mind, the City Planning Commission should consider legislation that directly affects the city plan, how the layout of the city operates. But if there's a public improvement within an existing building, technically under this language, it needs to be reviewed by the City Planning Commission first. But in changes to the interior of the building does not in any way affect the city plan. Another example is when Hopkins Airport reconfigures a runway, that it has to go to the City Planning Commission. And the city plan does not govern the runway configuration. The FAA primarily deals with and why is this important? It's important because the City Planning Commission, they do a great job, but they only meet twice a month on Fridays, the first and third Friday of the month. When an ordinance is referred to them, you can almost be guaranteed that it's going to take an additional month to the legislative process before the council can really take it up and decide whether to move forward with a project. And then, of course, if you we always get into the time period because the council breaks for summer recess. And that last city planning meeting in June can be really crazy because there's a lot of ordinances being sent to them. In 2008, we made an attempt to better define what ordinances should be sent to the City Planning Commission. And I do recommend that you have the director of the City Planning Commission come before you and talk about this. But if you could better define the pieces that should go there, it will reduce the number of ordinances that they get, and it will move the legislative process forward a lot quicker. I'm not in any way advocating that any piece of legislation, a zoning change, or anything that will directly affect the city plan, that should be kept from the City Planning Commission, just the opposite. I think the work of the City Planning Commission should zero in on the pieces that they really should be considering and not clog the process with a lot of extraneous ordinances that they really don't need to hear. Now, the City Planning Commission, in their defense, has come up with kind of processes to kind of deal with it. They have these executive calendars, and they put on the executive calendars the pieces that they really don't care about, but are only being referred to them because it's the way that this broad language is read. Well, but the problem is it still has to be referred to the City Planning Commission, and the City Planning Commission only meets twice a month, and so it's going to delay the legislative process. I'd like to think that maybe you could get to the point where those pieces that they have on the executive committee and council, that they move quickly, that they don't get it all, because they really don't, they're not interested in those ordinances. So I recommend that the commission see what they can do on mandatory referral.
John, I mean, so council members are very familiar with this referral process, but by way of example, last Friday the Planning Commission met, and there were two referrals that I was interested in. One in the ward, right, for a grant for a parking lot, and the other was the LED streetlights, right? So, Chairman of Public Utilities, I really wanted to just see if there was any interest from the Planning Commission, see if there had any questions. I wanted to be there, and then personally with the green infrastructure grant. And they were, I mean, and we have a current member and a former member of the Planning Commission. They don't have the time for that. I mean, they're going through zonings and rezonings and how residential houses are going to affect the neighborhood. They're wonderful people. They're smart and they work hard, but they don't really care about a grant in Camps Corners, right, in the legislation. But that took 3 additional weeks from the legislation that I'm begging and screaming and yelling, I need it, because we got to get it passed by June 4th. In the LED streetlights, council really wanted to talk about it. The committee is asking, when are we going to have hearings? What are we going to do? Like, it's stuck in planning, you know, and I'm not being mean. I mean, I'm not disparaging the commission. They're certainly important, but they had, and then they just administratively approved them, which I would have too, had I been sitting there. Their role is something important for us to learn. I think, if you haven't lived it. And like I said, Councilman McCormick currently sits and Councilwoman Cleveland sat for years on the Planning Commission, so we can talk about that in much more detail. But Carrie, did you have any
No,
thoughts on what Rick
Yeah.
just put
So
on the
I'm
table?
currently a member of the Planning Commission, a representative from council, and my colleague, Councilwoman Cleveland, would have a much more extensive viewpoint and background on this, but I would agree. I mean, there are, and I think we need to be careful on how we define what comes and doesn't come, but there's no reason, I mean, the idea of zeroing in on what that commission is intended to do, I think would make a lot of sense. And a grant in Cam's Corner, I do care about that grant. I want you to get it, but
not when you're wearing
it's
the
not
hat of
it's
the
not
Planning
applicable to the Planning
Right.
Commission. So I think that change makes a lot of sense.
So, yeah, Director.
No, I just had a point of clarification for folks who aren't familiar with this. If something's a mandatory referral to the planning commission and it does not go, because you might be thinking, well, why don't we just skip that? It's a void ordinance and it has no effect at all.
Right.
So there's a very powerful remedy if that process isn't followed.
Right.
Because the ordinance itself is void.
Good point, yeah.
I think that is important to try and take care of, but I leave to you to figure out what the magic word should be. But I think if you get the Planning Commission
Why did
people
I
in here,
invite
they
this
should
guy?
help you do that. Yeah.
He's got like 10 more days.
Well, I came up with language in
know,
2008, but
I'm
you don't have to
kidding.
follow my language. Two last ones to kind of actually get a little bit into the council prerogatives. I'm speaking for myself here. The first is Charter Section 84. Which is recommendation 60 on page 41. Throughout city government, the directors have a great deal of authority to hire their staff with enough people to do the work of the department. And they're constrained by the budget that the council takes up. So every year, the council has extensive budget hearings. They go through the staffing levels for the department, and they make a decision as to whether the staffing levels are adequate or not. And if they need more people in a particular staff, the director comes in and says, I need a little bit more money to hire more people. That is a whole process that goes on for weeks in February. For some reason, which I've never quite understood, the number of assistant prosecutors in the law department is capped at a number fixed by codified ordinance, which I believe that number is 21 right now. So even if the law director believes that she needs more assistant prosecutors because of an uptick in crime or whatever, before she can do that, she has to specifically come to the council and ask them to change that number. And I've never understood why that's important in the process, frankly. If the law director feels that she needs more prosecutors, then she should go as part of the budget process and say, I need 5 more prosecutors, make sure that the administration agrees that there is money available to do that, and then come to the council as part of the budget hearing and say, I need 5 more prosecutors to work in domestic violence or something like that, and not have to have this additional step of then putting in an ordinance to change the number from 21 to, 25 or whatever. And so to me, this has always been an antiquated provision where it basically says that the director of law has to appoint such a number of assistant prosecutors as council determines. And so there's a specific ordinance to that. Now, when it comes to assistant directors of law, the civil side, she has the free reign to hire as many civil lawyers as she wants. But when it comes to prosecutors, she needs to specifically come back to the council and ask the council to raise the number of prosecutors. And to me, I've never felt that there's any merit for that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Horvath. In the discussions that you had during the last Charter Review Commission, did you discuss the possibility of electing a city prosecutor or electing either the safety director, as in the Elliott Ness days,
No.
Okay, because, you know, the more the, Director Lang Henry's smiling, but, you know, I think that the more the public has an opportunity to vote on certain positions in the city, because right now, everything is appointed. And so maybe, you know, maybe we need to take a look at that. I'm going to put that in my bucket list for a few of the appointed positions to be elected, because that way we will get more response, because they are going to be directly accountable to our residents. And so I may not be, I'm not talking right now, I haven't really thought about the entire list, but I know that the safety director is something that I would like to see elected, and a prosecuting attorney, because they're doing the criminal side and the law director is doing the civil side. And those two things don't match with me.
Sure. I can confirm that those ideas never came before the commission. I personally, this is just me personally, think that's a terrible idea. And the reason for that is it creates new political fiefdoms within city government. The prosecutor is not answerable to the mayor. He's not answerable to the council. He's only answerable to the elected people to getting a majority of the vote. You have a safety director who doesn't have to follow the agenda of the mayor or the goals that the mayor wants to accomplish, doesn't really have to follow the goals of what the council wants, as long as that safety director can play to the voters and get a majority vote. And I personally think that that would make the operations of the city of Cleveland much more difficult to accomplish, but that's my personal opinion.
But still important to bring up any ideas.
But I agree with that. I just felt like, because I have,
Yeah,
I
well,
can give you
you
my
know,
opinion
I think I'm
before
gonna invite
before
you
you
back
go
when
off
you're
and
not
talk
an
about it, but I
employee.
think you should
Well, I think
consider
that
it if that's what you want.
I'd like to put that in the hopper, because, you know, I'm not exactly happy with all the policies and procedures, you know. I won't bring it up, but there is absolutely, you know, one issue that I have been advocating for since it was stripped from us in 2006. And, you know, because I have, you know, a safety director who doesn't understand that what the will of the people, if you put that on the ballot for a vote, it would pass overwhelmingly.
Yeah, I think we're going to try to stay away from personal, but.
We can stay
Council,
away from that, but I'm just saying.
The safety director is appointed by the mayor. The mayor is the one that runs, right? Anything that the safety director or the law director or the finance director does is a direct reflection of that duly elected mayor. And if they are not happy with it, it would be reflective in the popular vote. I mean, that's.
No, it doesn't work like
Okay,
that.
but we know you have the issue, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
It's not my only issue, but that's a big one.
It's a doozy.
Yes. Well, it's an easy one.
Well, can I throw one more doozy on the table?
Well, on that point, just very quickly, and I agree with Rick's analysis there, but maybe, I don't know if, per just the open discussion of this table, something like council confirmation on certain positions could be a middle ground there, where it's not directly elected, but there's some sort of, I'm just putting that, this is supposed to be an open table.
And I would just
so-
respond that I haven't seen us turn down a recommendation yet.
But we don't have that authority.
Even for the other positions, for the boards and commissions, I haven't seen us turn anyone down.
Well, just for thought.
Did we turn somebody down?
Yeah, somebody was turned down.
Our chairman of the mayor's appointment committee.
Okay, well, that's the first I've ever heard of one being turned down, but okay.
And on just specific to this, I would agree that it is antiquated back in the days when, you know, the prosecutor was the big bad.
Sure.
You know, stripping people of their freedoms, and they didn't want an abuse of power with an army of prosecutors stripping
Yeah.
personal liberties.
Whereas the
across
reality
city of
now
Cleveland.
is quite often the council wants more prosecutions in certain areas and
Right.
probably would be more amenable to hiring additional prosecutors without that additional, as part of the budget process
In
as
the budget
opposed to the
process.
legislative step.
Right.
Or if the council conversely feels that we've got too many prosecutors, then they'll cut the law department budget. So it's better, I think, that if it be left to the budget process and not
Well,
some other
and
piece.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but, you know, currently, these directors don't have to live in the city of Cleveland either, and some don't. And I think that that's a detriment and not serving our best interests in the city of Cleveland. We live here, you know. We live here, and I want,
We tried to do that.
I want some,
We lost on that one.
I want some stuff.
The last thing I want to recommend, I know is controversial to the council, but in my closing days in the city, I make the push one more time. It's in Charter Section 28, Recommendation 34. Back in the late 80s, the Ohio Supreme Court said that they interpreted our charter to be that whenever a majority of the members of council come together to discuss city business, or any majority of a committee of city council comes together to discuss city business, that meeting must be open to the public. And my personal belief is that has at times a chilling effect on the ability of certain council members to just get together to talk about city business in small groups, with this pressure to always have it being open to the public. Other cities have the ability to go into executive session under state law for clearly defined reasons. If they have personnel issues, they need to be briefed by the law director, even though we've always maintained that the attorney-client privilege gives us the ability to meet with the individual councilman without having to do it in a public forum. But I've always felt that the council should have the ability to go into executive session in the same way that other governments around the state can go into executive session. Anytime the council meets to discuss city business, it has to be open to the public. But frankly, state law recognizes there are certain topics that should not be discussed in in an open forum. And I think it hampers the council at times to have a candid and open discussion on certain key issues. So in 2008, we recommended that the city council have the ability to go into executive session in the same manner that other political subdivisions around the state have the ability to do that. I highly recommend that that be considered. The problem, of course, is a political one, because the media will portray this as city council trying to keep the voters out, it's anti-openness, but yet every suburban council has the ability to go into executive session in accordance with state law. But city council not only can have a majority meeting of the members of council, but can have a majority meeting of any committee of the council without it being open to the public. And I think the council should have the same ability to have candid private discussions on certain topics, the topics that are defined in the state law, the same as other cities have. And I recommend that. I know that's difficult to do politically, but I do think that you should seriously consider recommending that once again to the council. I've already talked about my closing. Yeah.
What are those exceptions?
I
in
didn't
state
bring
law?
them with me. I know, for example, it is personnel matters, but they're clearly defined, and it needs to be, you need to take a look at it. I'm sure Barbara can bring it to a future commission meeting if you want to consider that recommendation and really take it apart and everything else. But all I recommended was that you just take the same grounds that are already in the state law.
Yeah, and to this matter, I'd love to hear from our members of council here any practical implications of this happening recently, to give other commission members a perspective on how this matter might be hindering existing business brought forth towards council.
Yeah, I mean, it's how we do business, right? So we know the open records law. Our staff reminds us very regularly when we try to schedule meetings. So it's become just the way we do business, is no executive sessions. So it makes some meetings, like the Personnel Committee, which handles some delicate matters, you tread lightly on what you want the viewing public or any media partners that are welcome to attend. It makes it, you just try to keep it in generalities, right? And it's not that we're dancing around the open records law. I mean, it's open to the public, but should it have the political will of the people and of council to allow executive session, I'm sure it would be utilized. Not on a regular basis, I don't think. It would be on very rare occurrence. But I don't think about it, because I'm not allowed to. So, and I'm sure my colleagues would say, a quorum of a committee is 4. So technically you get 4 members of council together talking about any specific issue, and you have to put a notice out, right? We're just aware of that. I can't think of anything specific that I would say executive session, because that's not how my brain works when it's working. Councilwoman, you had something to add?
Right. Currently, there's a distinction between the political caucus, which is, because we're all Democrats, we should and be able to have a closed caucus of all the Democrats or Republicans or independents, if we would have them. If they want to discuss something and it's of a political nature without having the media, okay? And I know you guys are watching, but in the general legislature, they have their caucuses, their political caucuses, Democrat and Republican, and the media are just not allowed to come to the political caucuses. That's a caucus. But when we have a, what we're now calling like a committee of the whole, which is where we discuss public business, that is what I think you're describing right now, that's public business and everyone believes it, and it's in the charter that should be open to the public. We have not even really been preventing the media from coming to the political caucuses, but there are situations where there is something very sensitive that has to be discussed, and there's no way to do it, and the only way that you can do it is if you split, if you have 2 sessions, which is just skirting the
But
charter,
you really can't even do
and
that.
really is
You almost have to
not
have a one-on-one
Yeah.
between individual council people, and it's hindrance to the process.
What's the difference between a caucus and an executive committee?
a caucus.
The political caucus has nothing to do with the operation of city business.
Right.
That's straight politics, partisan politics, and it's legal. We don't do it, I don't think, or I haven't been invited, but,
No, we do. We
right,
do.
maybe they're talking about me, probably.
That's right,
Yeah, I know.
most likely.
Can I ask a quick question to expedite this?
Sure.
As far as process, because you're making a recommendation, I would like some further information before I'd be settled to even make an opinion.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. At the beginning of this, so Mr. Horvath is just giving us his historical perspective and his recommendation. We're going deep into all this through this process. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is just a big picture.
Yeah. You're not taking any
This is
votes at all today.
Institutional knowledge, big picture, but he's taking the opportunity to put his,
I just wanted to bring to your
Asterisk.
attention these recommendations. I
Right.
assume the staff will preserve them, and somewhere down the
I
road, you'll
apologize.
discuss it.
I'm a mover. I mean, I act. So if I hear something, I'm
Right.
ready to move.
well, we're gonna have plenty of notes.
I like a lot of movement, so I apologize.
No,
I'm
you're
with him.
absolutely
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
All right, Councilman Casey, or did you have yours?
Yeah, no, I got.
Sorry,
just
and then McCormick.
Just to to the members, or to the members of the commission who aren't on council, when you have a majority of the committee, right, sometimes it makes it difficult. Like Phyllis, Marty, myself, and Carrie, if we're all out somewhere, but we all sit on utilities, you know, even if we're at a fundraiser or we're at a sporting event or what have you, I mean, you know, we're regular, normal people outside of, you know, the auspice of being on council, then we, you know, we do things socially too, but you have to be careful sometimes with what you say when you're out together, when we're not on official business, just because of committees that we sit on and stuff like that. So, you know, it makes it difficult sometimes, you know, when it comes to having a quorum for committee and not council as a whole.
Right. Councilman
Mr.
McCormick.
Chair, thank you. And I would though, respectfully disagree with our corporate counsel. I think that's a good thing, quite honestly, that we are required, if it's public business, to be with lights, camera, action, because I think there's, you know, a lot of us that wouldn't do something that's not appropriate, most of us, if not all of us, but in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, if there is a new group that might not have the same good intentions, I think the more sunshine that can be shed is a good thing. When it comes to official public business, right? If we're talking about a soccer game or politics, obviously I think that's separated. But if it's business money of the public interest, I think it should be.
Yeah,
My
and
two cents.
that's certainly a popular opinion, which is why Mr. Horvath saved it for last. And knowing that anytime you say executive session to people who don't live or breathe City Hall air a lot, it means a different thing. But in pure application, I can think of very few instances where I would have really appreciated an executive session in my 11 years. But it's a discussion that we're going to have, especially now knowing that it's important to certain members. And again, Mr. Horvath's institutional knowledge and him picking that out of 115 means that I might be missing the boat completely, which is why I'm the chair.
That completes my list. And, you know, I was going to end by, again, reiterating the importance of the non-elected officials at the table to speak their mind, but I am pleased to see that you're willing to do that anyway, and I'm glad that you're having this discussion. I personally think the discussion you had this morning is important. I think that all of your opinions are important, and I think it's imperative that the commission have these kinds of discussions, very civil manner, of you know, the pros and cons of any recommendation you have, any opinion you have. I think you should be putting on the table. I think your opinion should be preserved. And then when you're done, as I said early in my discussion, I think for each recommendation, I think you should give the council and the voters a summary as to analyzing why you recommended a particular change. And then I think, finally, I think it would be helpful if, as a commission, you prioritize them. So you may come up with 20, 30 recommendations or more. And we just didn't have time in 2008 to prioritize them. And I think that would be helpful too. If you think that this change is the very first change that council should put on the ballot, I think as a commission you should recommend that. And you prioritize them so that it's not just this report. Our report was really unwieldy. I mean, I wonder how many people actually read all the way through it because we had so many changes. So come up with a decent summary as to why you're recommending something, and then prioritize those recommendations for the council and for the public. For of everything you've heard, what is, you know, what are the top 5, 10 changes that you really think need to be made sooner as opposed to later? And I think you'll provide a valuable service to the citizens of Cleveland. Those are my comments.
Great. Well,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
If I could just add, again, I wish Rick would be here throughout this process, but I know you served your time, you served very well, and we're just going to miss you tremendously. And I don't know, I think some of us have your cell phone number, so we might call you. But one of the things I was going to mention is that, you know, the last time we did a report to council, along with the recommendations, and I was just actually having gone back and read it, I have to confess, and I will. But, you know, one of the things that we and some of the other members did was send individual letters to the council saying, you know, we suggest these things be put on the November ballot. Those were our priorities. And we also gave some rationale for some of the other things that we recommended. So if you can take a look at those and, again, you know, get an idea that, you know, I think for most things that we recommended, we did say why we recommended those things, those changes be made, so.
It wasn't much detail, but yeah, that's where I was kind of going. We kind of gave a few sentences on each because there were so many. But
Right.
maybe a little bit more paragraphs describing why you think it's important. But you're right. And because there were so many, individual members of the commission took the time to write letters to the council specifically prioritizing. But it might be stronger and more meaningful if, as a body, you recommend certain things be done first. Might have a greater bearing and maybe a better chance of making sure that they do get on the ballot and get before the voters to decide.
Great, thank you. Rick, thank you.
Sure.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know the
And your
commission.
number?
Yeah. Commission members appreciate it, and certainly the citizens of the city of Cleveland for all of your years of service. And please keep watching Channel 20 and call us if
Yeah. Say,
if
oh
we're
my
really,
God,
really,
why are you
yeah.
doing this?
I mean, I hope retirement is more than Channel 20, but if you have time Thursdays at
Why
10,
did you come up with that?
just tune in and feel free to call us. So thank you again
Sure, be happy
for
to.
everything.
Thanks.
So next on the agenda is the process for the 2018 charter review. Again, that was kind of big picture, umbrella, background, history lesson, insight. I had met with staff over the last 2 weeks to try to get a manageable process for this endeavor. And included with the packet was, or with the agenda was a packet that said Part A, City Administration. So what we did is we took the entire charter and broke it down into a number of subsections. And if you go to the first page of the charter in the red tab, we kind of took the different chapters and lumped them into 7 different sections. First of which is city administration, which would include chapters 1 and 11. It's really not the substance of, I mean, there's not a lot in here. But with this handout that you received is also the recommendations from the 2008 review. So what I'm going to ask as the chair is before each meeting to look at that section that's been designated and highlight, underline, asterisk, something, or email a question, a priority, something you want to explore further. We're going to have speakers come in, different directors of different departments. We can have, you know, unions or anybody come. But this is what how we're going to do. We're going to break it out by part, and we're going to try to go section by section and discuss as much or as little as you guys want, men and women want. That's how we're going to do it, unless somebody has a better idea. Or Rachel, if you had anything to add on our previous discussions. It's not, you know, there's no test. We don't expect you to know it all, but get an idea of what we're going to be talking about for that meeting. So I really don't want to waste anybody's time. I really just want to get in, make it better if we can, talk about it at least, and get out with something positive at the end. And this was the only way I could come up with making it a little more manageable. So Part A, City Administration, Chapters 1 and 11 will be discussed on Thursday the 24th. With that, Thursday the 24th is also Senior Day in the great city of Cleveland, where every ward in the city recognizes the significant accomplishments of a senior, which is at 10 o'clock in the morning. So you guys can meet, but council won't be here. So we've talked about it and requested or putting it on the table for a 1:30 on Thursday the 24th. Yes, Thursday the 24th. So our next regularly scheduled meeting, we try to do them at 10. Thursday the 24th, we can't because of Senior Day, and I won't be here. I'll be across at Public Hall recognizing a senior. So Let us know if you can or can't make it. Again, we need the quorum, and then we can do business, but if something else, we understand you're volunteering, if something else, like job, takes precedent, do it, and just let us know. But give us the feedback on the part or the chapter, if you can take the time to do that. I don't know what else I had to talk about. So that's the process for 2018, Senior Day, the 24th. Thoughts on Mr. Horvath, thoughts on how we can make this better? Yes?
Hello to the chair and to the commission. My recommendation, or I don't know if it was done in the past, was there a form that was used for the commission when we were reviewing the changes in the charter that we can follow? Like, for example, if we want to make recommendations for the change, the current read, the proposed read, the financial effect that it may have on the residents and/or the city of Cleveland, and maybe the advantage and disadvantage. So is there a form that we could follow so we can have consistency on how we come back with our recommendation? So we can all be on the same page.
Yeah, there's not a form. This is our form, and these are our different sections, right, the staff. So if you were read Part A and come up, man, that doesn't make any sense at all. Why does it say this? That's a legitimate question for the commission, right? Why does this section so-and-so, these are all recommendations, but why does it read like this? It doesn't make sense to me. That's a legitimate, perfect question, and then we can explore it here at the table. Put it into more manageable language, like how does this flow and affect city government? The financial implications will be part of the discussion, and we can bring in respected directors. Like if we really wanted to consider the number of prosecutors, it would be Director Langhenry that we would ask to present to the commission the financial impact, the administrative impact on waiving or lifting or lowering that requirement in the charter. But there's not a form, but I understand exactly what you're, like the minutes are our form. We're a public body, right? So everything that happens here. But we can talk about a form. The recommendations are all going to be in writing for all of us to consider. If it's print, email, that's the preference of the commission, and we can follow through on that. But you know, the formality of a form to me kind of restricts the open discussion and back and forth that we're looking for. And then after the end of the back and forth and discussion, we put it in writing, pros and cons, and then we vote, right? So I don't know how to get more communication out of that, but that's kind of our line of thinking, but we can talk about it for sure.
Thank you.
Anything else for discussion?
Can I follow?
Yeah,
I was hoping you
sure.
could follow with that. Do we have, because we're volunteers, I'm assuming, Mr. Chair, we have access to this lovely staff of yours?
Absolutely.
And so if we as commission members say we want this lovely staff to prepare a form so it make our discussion easily for us as volunteers, we could ask them to prepare something what she suggests. I think that's a fantastic suggestion.
Oh, yeah.
I like that. And if y'all can prepare something like that, that would help me.
Right.
So if we can we do that?
Sure.
Okay, so that, I think if we have suggestions like that, fellow commissioner person, that's a fantastic idea.
Right.
That would help me, so if we could ask your staff to prepare something like she suggested, that we can maybe have you email to us, so as we're looking through this, as they're busy people, we can say, okay, this is what I'm gonna do, so when I get to my meeting, I'm even more prepared.
Right. And that's.
I mean, I could draft something to send, and then
The thought is, as you read Part A and you're getting ready for next Thursday, the 24th, and you see Section 68 terms and qualifications, and what the heck is that? So the part would be Section 68 terms and qualifications. Why does it read like this? And then we can formally respond in writing to that. Yeah, I mean, if the form is the preference or just an email, I don't understand 68, or I want to know.
I think what she's referring to is kind of a common analytical structure that all commission members can agree upon, in which we analyze each recommendation we're bringing forth back to the commission. So pros, cons, operational impact, financial impact. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
Yes.
From the staff or from?
Just
From us, from us to follow,
Just-
to bring,
so that way we
to
can-
bring back to
So the
discuss.
points.
Okay.
So we can have some type of guideline, because I'm piggybacking on Mr. Horvath in regards to the effect that it's going to have on the public if we go to, take it to the Board of Elections for a vote. So we
Okay.
can say, hey, this is what it reads, this is what we would like for it to read,
Okay.
this is what the financial effect it would be with this change, with this proposed change, the advantage it will have for the citizens and the city of Cleveland, or the disadvantages that it may have, something that we can follow, so when we come back to the table to talk about it, we'll have a format. Hey,
Right.
I read section recommendation number 33, this is what I saw, this is what I would like to change, this is the effect it's going to have on the city of Cleveland staff, the budget for the city of Cleveland, and the financial effect and advantage it will have for the city of Cleveland residents.
Okay.
So just a guideline for
Yeah.
us to follow as a commission to bring back for discussion purposes.
Perfect. Yeah. Not only on the recommendations, but on the individual charter sections. It could be anything.
Just something that we can follow
But
to
it
bring
would
back
be
to discuss.
substantive and precise. So
Correct.
we are not swimming in this ocean.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a little lost on how we're proposing to pull all of this information together.
Well, I think the recommendation is to, so it's not to have a form, not the black and white form, but to have form to the recommendations.
Right.
And a process for analysis.
Right.
On each individual recommendation. And the current, what the issue on the table is to have that as an actual form. Recommendation, pros, cons, financial impact, Secretary of State, because it all has to be in ballot language, impact on constituents or, those kind of things, which is a great idea to have it memorialized, as long as it happens here in discussion, right? This is why we're here. So I think that the minutes are going to reflect all of that, but it's going to be a big document, and the minutes and the videotape and all those things. So I think we're just trying to collectively find a way to make this more manageable. The start is Part A, and then from there, we're going to go with some type of analysis on recommendations that each of us will have for discussion at or before the next commission meeting, right?
So, to be clear, my question is, are we bringing these all back in writing, or are we emailing them on a form that's going to be sent to us so that they're all in one place, so that everybody can follow it? How is, in practicality, working with everybody's thoughts about certain sections of the charter and how, and what they think should be done, if anything.
Right.
In practicality, how are we going to communicate that to everyone?
Through Rachel, just like everything else.
Rachel, are you going to, are you,
Email some type of preferred method of submission of recommendation and analysis.
You want me to email everybody?
Yeah, with a process.
And then-
This
and
is our
then
preferred
everybody
method,
will-
right?
Everybody on the commission will fill out their form and email it back to me.
Or bring it.
Or bring it.
Right. Yeah.
well, which one is it going, I have to be
Both.
clear.
Yeah, we're going to be clear that anything you have to say about a recommendation is going to be considered, no matter how you bring it.
So
In
it-
writing, on one specific form, or if you're sitting down here thinking of something, we're going to record it, it's going to be weighed by the commission, and it's going to be voted on.
Okay.
Nobody's ideas or input is going to be discounted because of a form or not a form.
I understand. If Rachel is going to send us out a form and we're going to fill it, and if anyone wants to fill it out and get it back to her by email, then it has to be it has to be sent to us so that we can fill it in online and then submit it back to her, which doesn't always happen,
This is complicated.
It's not complicated, but there is a,
This is
there a website?
Yeah.
Why does it?
Okay, so what we could do is just add that form to the website, click here, fill it out, submit it right back, and it stays right there, and then you can print them out and have
You can't
I
submit
don't-
stuff right back.
I don't know if, I think we're overcomplicating it a tad. So I think what we're trying to say is that as commission members, we want just a common framework to answer these key questions related to the proposed amendments that we discuss as a body as we go out throughout this process. I think that's all what we're recommending. Is that correct?
Not a formal form that we
Yeah,
gotta take
just
a
kind of
vote
a
on, just a
common-
method of how
common
we're gonna
framework.
evaluate and analyze
Just
the
key
changes
questions
that
that
we
we're
wanna bring
considering.
back to
That's all.
discuss. We don't have to vote on a form, it don't even have to be in a format. I was just looking for a way for all
I
of
just
us
wanna
to
know.
be able to distinguish what we're writing, what recommendations we're changing or recommending, and the financial effect that it may have. And it's just for discussion purposes, just looking for a way so all of us can be on the same page. It don't have to be an official form, we don't have to title the form A-1. It doesn't have to be that formal. I'm just trying to find a way for all of us to be on the same page as far as bringing back recommendations, so it can be simplified. So we only have a 2-hour window, so when we have discussion, we can have our 3 main points that we can bring out, you know, the 3 takeaways or the whatever it is we would like to propose and discuss for the change. Nothing so
It
formal.
makes total sense, and
So-
I think it's via email. I mean, that's the communication method, and there's a permanent record for it, and an email to the staff. You know, financial implications are that's what we're gonna talk about, right? And a lot of them shouldn't have, from the charter standpoint, a huge financial impact. But I think, yeah, email is going to be the best, because then you can, as you review Part A, you can try to put your ideas in some semblance of order with a specific chapter or section, and we're going to discuss it as a body. But yeah, I don't want a 1A, B, D. I'll be gone for sure. Director?
Yeah, no, just to clarify, it sounds like what you're saying is you want an analytic protocol. So
Right.
what we're going to do when we consider a section is, you know, as commissioners, if you get it, consider whether you understand it, consider what you think it means, consider what pros and cons of changing it are, consider if there are any financial ramifications for that change, consider if there are ramifications to other sections of the charter as a result of that change. So it sounds like it's really just an analytic protocol that you're looking for, just to key in for folks on what are the kinds of things you should think about when you're analyzing a change. So I don't know, it's a form as much as, you know, we can send kind of a protocol out based on that and say this is how it may be helpful.
Every recommendation will be looked at in this.
Just, yeah, just,
Right.
or just for commissioners, and what it sounds like you're struggling with is, you know, I'm looking at a section, it's different for those of us who work with these every day. What should I be looking for? And I think that's what you're grappling with. So it's not necessarily a form that anyone fills out, but they're looking for, like, what are the kinds of things I should be thinking about when I read this particular section? Is that what the consideration seems to be?
Yes, because
Yeah.
when I
So
sit
I
on,
think it's a one-time thing. It's,
when I sit
yeah.
on other boards and we want to make bylaw changes,
Yeah.
we had a current read, we say, I want to recommend this change, this is the effect it's going to have, whether it be financial or non-financial, what effect it's going to have, and then that's easier for those of us to discuss it when we have our general body meetings to determine, okay, the effect is going to be great, the effect is not going to be great, so just something, like the law director said, analytical.
Protocol. I think that's what you're grappling with.
Yes.
And so nobody has to necessarily fill it out each time.
No,
but it's a key reminder to folks who don't do this
Key
on a regular
questions.
basis. This is what I'm looking for. This is what you should be keying into. So, okay.
Do we have a movement to adopt form?
I move that we move.
1A subsection B, I.
So would you like me to just kind of do an analytic protocol?
I would.
So
Yeah,
just
key
one, two,
questions to consider when you look at
whatever it is,
checklist.
and then email it out to
Yeah.
everybody. Now, Mr. Chairman, do you still want everybody to email back to me their recommendations? Or,
If they have, yeah, I mean, if anybody ever has a recommendation, I think that's, if you're reading it and you come up with something, email is the best, because then we
Yeah.
can compile a report at the beginning of each commission member. We'll give it to Rachel for 10 minutes to tell us
And
what
it doesn't mean you don't bring it up here.
Absolutely
Yeah,
not.
just bring it up here and talk about
But
it.
we
It'll
need
be-
to keep a record.
Yes.
We need to keep it kind of clean, without forms, and that would be through you, if you're okay with it. Sorry, thank you. So any communication as commission members review the appointed chapter for that week, or section, or part, you'll keep a running list and think about it, and we'll talk about it, and then we'll address it at the commission meeting in detail.
All right.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so for the 24th, we're dealing with chapters 1 and chapter 11.
Correct.
So if we, so the breaking down of this should be, you know, pretty organized. So if we read this and we have something, we should email Rachel and say, you know, I have a thought on this, I have an idea, you know, I recommend this, I recommend that, or I want to discuss that. If she could bring that to the next meeting and pass it out so that we know what everybody's thinking, since that's what we're going to, so that we'll have a heads up what everybody else is already thinking, so we don't have to start all over from the beginning.
Okay.
Yes.
And then one other question, if, or request, if a member cannot make it, since we're doing it this way.
Yeah.
Okay. If a member cannot make it, if you can email after their absence, what the subject of the next meeting is going to be so that they can go over that, or just let them know what the subject's going to be.
Yeah, we're hoping to have that all put together by the 24th, probably, with the different parts, with the chapters associated with that part, and a calendar of how we're going to do it. And to that point, you know, say all the recommendations from Mr. Horvath made a lot of sense to the commission members, then an email to Rachel said, the recommendations from Mr. Horvath today made a lot of sense to me, and I'd like to discuss them, so we can put them on the calendar for the part that they apply to, right? So don't think that we're only going to talk about this and you can only email us about Part A, and don't even think about recall petitions. That's not how we're going to do it, right? I mean, we're trying to break it down into more manageable sections, but it's still a breathing, living document that is all the charter of the city of Cleveland. So by no way am I going to stifle your volunteerism and commitment to the great city of Cleveland. I have nothing else. Members, comments, input? Nadas? Nothing. Charter Review Commission of the City of Cleveland stands adjourned to meet May 24th at 1:30. I usually take my senior out to lunch, but this year I'm going to take my senior.